do that. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to just show you a couple things. I'm going to show you Canvas, okay? Yeah, a couple things on Canvas that would be helpful for you. So I'm going to share my computer screen here. Okay, it's my email. Don't necessarily need to see that. Hold on one sec. Okay. All right, so here we are with our Canvas page. You guys can see that, right? Just give me a thumbs up or something if you can see that. Good, thank you. All right, so a couple things. Number one, the lab schedule. I showed that to you before, but it's under the syllabus page. And then you click on this syllabus right here. And then at the scroll to the very bottom, you'll have that lab schedule. That'll tell you a couple things. It'll tell you when all of the, well, actually I'll pop it up right here because I have it on my screen. This is what it is. It'll tell you when all the sync sessions are. So all those purple ones are the synchronous sessions, okay? And we're just gonna kind of see how this goes. This is obviously new for all of us, and I thought it would be helpful to do some synchronous stuff here, but we also can do it asynchronously after we'll do these few for the skeleton lab, and I'll get some feedback from you guys, and we'll see if it's worth the time to continue that once we get into the muscle stuff here, okay? One thing you can see from this is you can see what quiz we have each week, okay? So sync session this week, no quiz. Next week is, and this is just week up, so this is the Monday, but next week we have a chemistry lab, which is an online lab, but we'll have the quiz over the skeleton, okay? So you'll take the quiz at this normal lab time at 5:30 if you're supposed to be in this lab. You'll take it at 5:30, okay? And I'll give you some more details on that. You'll take it during your scheduled lab time, whether or not we're having a synchronous lab session or not, okay? And then the next week, we'll be back with the synchronous session, no quiz. The week after that, the week of September 7th, we don't have a lab that week, but you do have a quiz that you'll need to take during your lab time again, okay? So always refer back to this. I also have it in the weekly overview pages, so you can see that, okay? One thing I want to show you on this mastering, or on my lab and mastering link, one of your best study resources for the lab is going to be in Mastering AMP, okay? So yours probably looks slightly different than mine. You probably obviously just have the student links, but under more, for me at least, you're going to click on the study area, okay? There's an error with it right now, and I've contacted them and they're working on it, but you should write this down. So you're going to go to study area, and then you're going to click on something called PAL 2.0, okay? Or it's called Practice Anatomy Lab 2.0, okay? It's your best resource for studying the bones, the muscles. It has pictures of the cat muscles, which we're going to do some, you would normally do cat dissection, but you're going to be learning the cat muscles. And it also has pictures of human cadaver muscles. So you're going to be needing to know all of that once we get to the muscles. It's got very nice pictures of all those. It has that function where you can turn the labels off. You can hover over it, then the label pops up. And so that's a nice way to study. Okay, so it's under the study area, PAL 2.0, Practice Anatomy Lab. That's going to be probably your best resource, okay, for studying. All right, let's hop back over to the modules here. Okay, so in the modules, I just added this one today, lab resources, okay? So if you click on skeleton lab resources, we've got all kinds of stuff here. Okay, so you can always access the lab handout right here. Okay, that's the one you should already have. Here's just showing you how to get to that practice anatomy lab thing, okay? And then this is a very nice PDF that has very clear and distinct images of all the bones that you need to know, bone flashcards. So you can print those up if you want, or you can just use them on your computer or device, but that's a very nice study tool. These are the slides that I'm gonna present to you here in a second, okay? That's just a PDF of those slides. So if you wanna download those, you can have them, or you can look back to them later, that's fine. And then we have them for next week too. And then Dr. Fleetstra, who teaches the section 1 of the class and 3 labs, she put together some very nice videos walking you through all of the bones of the upper appendicular skeleton and then the lower appendicular skeleton here. After probably sometime next week, we'll add the axial skeleton videos that she's doing. So definitely look through those. They're only about 10 minutes each, so they're not that long, but it'd be worth your time to check those out. Okay. All right, any questions so far? Feel free to just unmute yourself and ask a question. Okay.
I had a quick question about the human cadavers for
Hmm.
the like the lab. Like when if we were in class, we would be doing the human cadavers, correct?
Yes.
And
And
so what is the plan for that?
so the way it
Since
works in
you're on lab.
anatomy in this class, anyways, is you don't actually dissect the cadavers.
Oh, okay.
They've already been dissected, but we would open them up. We would walk through. I would walk you through all the muscles that you need to know, and then they would just be open, so you can go check them out. You can study them. That's how it would be if we were in person. So
Mm-hmm.
what we did instead, actually, just today, between this lab and the morning lab, I was in the lab with the kind of this professional video crew that helps us record videos, and I recorded some videos of walking you through those cadavers. They have a super nice setup with 2 cameras and stuff. So those videos will be posted similar to how these ones are that Dr. Fleetster did. So you'll have that to study those. So you'll still need to know the muscles. You just won't actually get to touch them like you would have if we were face to face. Okay. Any other questions on that or anything else so far? Okay. All right. So I think that's all I want to share with you there. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen from my iPad so I can walk us through a couple things. So we're going to look at the lab handout. So go ahead and get your lab handout out. Okay. Oops, not that one. This one here. Okay. All right. So is that better if I flip it? Actually, it might be. Huh? Oh, no, it's not. Okay. All right. There we go. Okay. So let's go ahead and walk through a couple things here. So every lab handout you have will have some page numbers up here for the textbook. It'll show you which page numbers you should be kind of taking a look at beforehand if you have some time. If not, then definitely during lab. So you're gonna, if you have your textbook with you, I'm gonna send you into the group with your partner here in a second, or partners. And so if you have that book available to you, then you're gonna need that. Okay. Or if you have the e-text, you can pull that up as well. Okay. So that's this week. In 2 weeks when we come back to the skeleton lab, we'll be at those pages. Okay. Again, lots more material on Master and AMP in that practice anatomy lab 2.0. Okay. So a couple things about the schedule here. Let me just briefly, well, I kind of already walked through it, but I can go ahead and write in the exact dates here. So our first lab, so appendicular lab, is the week of August 17th, right? That's what we're doing right now. Okay, and no quiz. But the quiz on the appendicular lab is the week of August 24th. Okay, so obviously it's not the 24th, but it's the Thursday of that week. Okay, then we have the axial lab the following week after that. That's the week of August 31st. Okay, and there's no quiz that week, but then the following week, the week of September 7th, we have no lab, but we have the quiz on the axial lab. Okay, and then the skeleton review lab is the week of September 14th. Okay, and then lastly, we'll have a skeleton practical. That's a laboratory exam worth 75 points. Then we'll have another one later on the muscles worth 125 points because there's so many more muscles to know. Okay, so the skeleton practical is the week of September 21st. Okay. All right. So that's kind of just giving you an overview of what it's going to look like. Let's talk a little bit about what you need to know. Okay. So for those 2 quizzes, and then for the skeleton practical, the setup will be very similar. Okay. They're going to be Canvas quizzes that are timed. Okay. They're timed Canvas quizzes. There's going to be a picture of a bone. Okay. And there could be really 3 types of questions on that question. Okay, so let's say you got a picture of a femur there. Okay, the femur's there. One question could just be name this bone. You just type in femur. Okay, another question could be name what side this is. Is this a right or a left? Right. So then you need to figure out if that's a right or a left femur. Okay, and then lastly, you need to figure out some structure. So it could be a picture of that femur, and then it could have a little circle on it somewhere. It could have an arrow pointing to it somewhere. Okay, and then the question will say name the structure in this that circle that's being pointed to. Okay, and so you'll need to type in that structure. So it's not multiple choice. It's purely you're just typing it in. Okay, So those are the 3 types of questions you'll have on those quizzes and on the practicals. Okay, again, they're timed, they're not open note. We'll be using HonorLock for those. HonorLock's a program that kind of locks down your computer, doesn't allow you to do anything else with it. Also takes a recording of your face as well as the screen. Yeah, and that's just a way to make sure that you're not using anything except what's in your brain. Okay, so that's kind of what you're preparing for. So as you study this evening, you want to have that in mind, right? You want to have in mind that you need to know to be able to identify bones, know the right or the left side, and then know the structures. And I'll show you where to find those in a sec here on the handout. Okay, so let's look down the handout here. All right, so on page 4 of the handout here, we have some terminology that's going to be very important for you to know. Okay, so these planes are kind of our first thing. Okay, so let's start out talking about these planes a little bit, and I'm going to demonstrate a couple of these planes. So first of all, you've got the frontal plane there. So the way you want to think about the planes is like a slice of your body, right? So there's picture like a piece of glass or something very flat that just goes directly through. Okay, and so that frontal plane goes directly through the middle of your body this direction. Okay, so it's straight this way. So the way that I'll typically talk about it is I'll ask you, what's a movement that occurs in the frontal plane? Okay, so frontal plane movements include shoulder abduction, shoulder adduction. Okay, they would also include side flexing of your neck, right? So going this way, back and forth. Okay, hip abduction, hip adduction. So it's these kind of movements. So when you think about a movement occurring in a plane, the body part pretty much stays in that plane the whole time. Okay, so that's the frontal plane. Yeah, it's also known as the coronal plane if it's going through the head. Okay, and it says that in the handout there. Okay, secondly, let's talk about the sagittal plane. The sagittal plane is like this. Okay, so it's directly like this. And when you think about sagittal plane movements, you're thinking mostly about movements that are flexion and extension. Okay, so we're thinking about a movement like this, flexing my elbow like this, flexing my elbow, extending my elbow, right? Flexing my shoulder, extending my shoulder. Okay, so those are sagittal plane movements. Okay, and you have a couple different things. There's what's called the mid-sagittal plane, which is the one just directly in the center. Okay, so your nose would stay in the mid-sagittal plane when you're going when you're doing this yes movement, right? When you're doing neck flexion and neck extension, your nose stays right in the mid-sagittal plane. Okay, but you also have parasagittal planes, which would just be over here. It's where my ear would stay when I'm doing that neck flexion and neck extension. Okay, so that's the second one. The third one is probably the little bit trickier one. It's the transverse plane. And so think about that just being flat like this, slicing straight through. And these are all of your rotational movements. Okay, so when you go no, like this with your neck rotation, that's happening in the transverse plane. You could also think about shoulder rotation. Okay, if you put your shoulder like this and you go in and out like this, that's occurring in the transverse plane. Okay, so that's a transverse plane movement. Same thing with hip rotation, all of those. Okay, so you'll need to know those, not just for the lab, but also for the class. Those will be on the exam as well. Okay, and then moving down here to some more terminology that's very important to know. Okay, we got axial, appendicular, we've talked about those. Proximal and distal. Proximal means closer to the body. Okay, so we could say something like the elbow is proximal to the wrist, right? It's closer to the body down that limb than the wrist is, okay? But we could say the wrist is distal to the elbow, okay? So that would be one example of that, okay? Superior just means above, right? Inferior means below. Anterior means in front. Posterior means behind, okay? And those are the main ones there. And then medial and lateral, we'll also use a lot. Medial is towards the midline, lateral is away from the midline. Okay, any questions about that terminology there? So again, you're going to need to study that. That's all the teaching I'll really do on it, but you will need to study it and be familiar with all of those terms for the class and the lab. Okay, any questions on those? Okay. All right, so this one here, so page 5 has some more terminology. Okay, we normally the first day of class, we normally have you come into class, first day of lab, we normally have you come to the lab and take a quiz on these terms right here, okay? We felt like that was gonna be too stressful for the first week this time around, so we didn't even do it, okay? So you won't actually have a quiz on these terms, but if you start reading those things, they're kind of like a whole nother language, right? It gets into some serious Latin when you look at these, right? So tuberosity, trochanter, styloid, ramus, right? All these meatus, fossa, okay? So you're gonna see these terms pop up when we look at the structures on the bones. And it's good to just refer back to this and say, what the heck is a meatus, right? Oh, it's a canal-like passage, okay? That kind of makes sense by looking at what the structure is. And that'll just help you understand it. It'll help you spell it right, okay? Because again, it's not multiple choice on those quizzes. It's actually you're typing in the right answer, okay? And the spelling does not have to be 100% perfect on those, okay? As long as we can obviously tell what it is that you're typing, then you're good. We're not going to mark you down for that, okay? But you can run into some problems sometimes by just changing one letter, okay? So there's the coracoid process and there's the coronoid process, okay? So a spelling error, yeah, if you change the C for an N, but we don't know which one you were trying to do, right? So yeah, makes sense. Same thing with it's a common thing for people to do smushes with words. So we have the fibula and the tibia, right? Sometimes people put the tibula, okay, or the fibia, right? And that's a smush, right? So we don't know which one you were actually trying to say, right, out of those two. So you wouldn't get any credit for that answer, even though it's a minor spelling error. We just can't tell which one of the two you thought it actually was, right? So that's where a small spelling error could get you the full points off. Okay, questions on those? Okay, all right, so exercise 2 is what we're gonna dive into here in just one sec. Okay, these are the appendicular bones, upper extremity. Okay, so when you, the place you wanna look to see what do I need to know for the quizzes and the practicals, it's what's in these tables, okay? So this table right here, okay? And then you go down, it continues right there. And then exercise 3, we're gonna also look at that tonight. That's appendicular bones, but that's the lower ones, okay? And so then we got this table that you need to know, and then this whole table here. Okay, so it goes into page 8. And then the axial ones we'll do the next time. Okay, not right now. We'll do that next time. Okay, so we're going to start with these. So again, one very important thing to point out. See on the scapula here, it says left versus right. That means you need to know left versus right if it's a scapula. Okay, but a clavicle, you don't need to. Okay, that's good because it's really hard to tell on the clavicle whether what side it is. Okay, so just make sure you look at that. If it says left versus right, you need to know versus left versus right. If you see disarticulated, what that means is you have to be able to identify it when it's not attached to the rest of the skeleton. Okay, when it's just by itself. Okay, so you see disarticulated on all of those, but then you get down to these hand bones, these little tiny carpal bones. None of those do you have to know disarticulated. That would be impossible. Okay, that would be really, really hard. So you don't have to know those. So it doesn't say disarticulated. Okay. All right. Any questions on that and on the setup of what you're after there? Okay. Feel free. Go ahead. Pipe in. Somebody have some? Okay. All right. So I'm going to switch over to the PowerPoint, and this would be those intro slides for the appendicular skeleton. And so, yeah, so we've kind of already talked through this, what you need to know, the terminology, those exact definitions, identifying the bones, all the structures on the bones that it has, left versus right, if it says you need to know it. And then this one, which feature the bone articulates with, that's not going to be a question on the quiz or the practical, okay? But it helps you really put it together on the body, okay? So you see these big condyles on the end of the femur. It's nice to be able to say, all right, yeah, that goes on the tibial plateau to make the knee, right? And that really helps you kind of visualize it and place it where it needs to go, okay? But again, there won't be actual questions on that articulation, but it's just very helpful for you to understand it. Okay, so we've talked about that. Okay, so let's walk through a couple bones. I'm going to walk through a couple techniques on what you need to do and just give you some tips on how to study this. And then I'm going to send you in with your partners, give you a little time to actually just walk through this systematically, go right through that table, see if you can identify each one, find those structures, make some notes next to the structures, and kind of give yourself some reminders of where it is. Okay, but before we do that, let's walk through this. Okay, so what bone is this here? Everybody unmute yourself and yell it out if you know it.
Scapula.
Scapula. Awesome. Okay, scapula, also known as a shoulder blade, right? But the scapula is the scientific term there. Okay, so this is scapula. So you do need to know left versus right on the scapula, right? It says right there, left versus right. So here's how you're going to do that, okay? You're going to need to identify two landmarks. Okay, on every bone that you need to know left versus right, you need to walk through this process, okay? I'm gonna walk through it with you here on the scapula, but you'll need to walk through it on all the other ones, okay? So you need one landmark that tells you whether you're on the anterior or posterior side, okay? So that's number one. And then the second landmark you need to know is whether you're looking at the medial or the lateral side. Okay, because if you can identify, all right, this is the front, this is the medial side, this is the anterior, this is the medial, then you can visualize and just line your body up with it, right? And then you know where it is, okay? So that's important to do, and you're going to need to be able to do that on both sides because obviously you may not have a picture that has both sides of it like this, okay? So let's start with that anterior posterior one. That's a little bit simpler on the scapula. Is there anything there that stands out to you that would obviously tell you which side is anterior or which side is posterior? You don't need both, you just need one because the other side is obviously the other side. Unmute yourself if you got one for me.
The scapular spine.
Scapular spine, right here. Spine of the scapula, definitely. Let's actually feel your spine of the scapula, okay? It's always best if you can find your own bones when you're doing this because then you think your brain interprets that in a totally different way, okay? So best place is find your clavicle first. Everybody can find their own collarbone, right? Find your collarbone, do this with me, okay? And then kind of walk your fingers up, itsy bitsy spider style, okay? Up and over. You're gonna touch your traps there. How many people have a knot right there in your traps? I do. We're spending way too much time on our computers, okay? So you feel that knot and then just keep walking down. The next big bone you hit, it feels almost like the clavicle, right? It's kind of long and skinny like the clavicle. That's the spine of your scapula, right? It's right there, okay? If we go right on top of that and kind of push straight down, we're on one of our rotator cuff muscles there, right? That's the supraspinatus. We'll learn those later, don't worry. And then if we go right underneath that and push in, that's another rotator cuff muscle. That's our infraspinatus, okay? That's the spine of the scapula, okay? So what is it always facing, anterior or posterior? Which one?
Posterior.
Perfect, yeah. So we know that's the posterior side. So we know this has to be the anterior side, okay? And then let's think about mediolateral, okay? Mediolateral, we have, well, we know that the scapula is part of one of our major joints, right? What is the major joint that the scapula is a part of?
Shoulder joint.
Shoulder, absolutely, okay? And the shoulder is a ball and socket joint. There's the socket, right? There's the socket, is that glenoid fossa, okay? So that glenoid fossa, which way would it point? Would it point medial or lateral? And I'm gonna do it a different way. If you think that points medially, then give me a thumbs up, okay? Just write with your hand, I can see you all. If you think that points medially, give me a thumbs up. If you think it points laterally, give me a thumbs down. Okay, just keep them up. Yeah, keep them up or down, whatever it is. Okay? If you're not sure, go like this. I don't know. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, so yeah, we're kind of, yeah, a lot of people are saying lateral. It's definitely lateral, right? Because that makes sense because it sticks out this way. And if our humerus has to come up and attach to that, right? The humerus is the ball part of the ball and socket. So it wouldn't make sense if the socket was pointing this way, the humerus would have to come up through our chest to get to our shoulder, right? So that fossa has to point laterally, and then the humeral head can pop right into that, okay? So if we know that glenoid fossa or glenoid cavity is lateral, okay? Now, don't just jump to your answer too quickly, but by knowing that this is the front over here, this is lateral, envision it on your own body, okay? Position your picture so it's on your own body. Where would that go? Okay, so give me a thumbs down if it's a right side, give me a thumbs up if it's a left side. Down for right, up for left. Put it up high so I can see your hands. Some people I can't see your hands. Okay, all right, we're still a little bit mixed, okay? This is a right-handed scapula for sure, okay? So you're gonna put it right there, right? So this front part that we can see, this anterior part, you guys can see it. I don't know why I'm doing that. Yeah, so this anterior part is nice and smooth. That's going to be facing forward, right? And then laterally is coming out. So the only way that would work with this one, if it's on our right side, okay? So we're thinking of the right side of the person that this bone belongs to, not like if you were looking at the person, your right side. It's the right side of the person that this bone belongs to. Okay, questions on that? Okay, so very important process. I want you to walk through that same process with every other bone that you need to know right or left on. Okay, so you get to identify the landmarks that work for you. And maybe these two landmarks aren't the best for you on the scapula. Come up with different ones. It's totally fine. Okay, whatever helps you remember it. Okay, all right, so there's the scapula. Okay, it's going to go like that. All right, what bone's this? Yell it out. Clavicle. Good. You don't need to know right or left on this guy. Okay, but it is the most broken bone in the body. Okay, all right. Okay, sits like that. Okay, this bone is the humerus. Okay, this is another one you need to know right or left on. Okay, I'll give you a little hint. The posterior side of the humerus has a big hole in it. Okay, so that's my best posterior landmark back there. It's called the trochlear notch. Okay, and then the medial side is pointing towards that glenoid fossa, right? So that's got to point medially. The head of the humerus has to point medially. So that's a quick one there. I won't walk you through that whole process, but that's how I do it. See, this side doesn't necessarily have a hole. It kind of sticks out. This is the anterior side. Okay. All right, so that's the humerus. So we've got the two forearm bones here, the radius and the ulna. Okay. What is this bone right here? Your elbow. And when my son, who's getting way too big, gives me a dead leg with his elbow, what's he using? What bone is he hitting me with? You guys know? What's your big elbow bone? Any guesses? It's the ulna, right? It's this guy right here. That's called the trochlea of the ulna. So a lot you almost would think it's your humerus because your humerus is such a bigger bone that feels like a big bone at the end of your elbow there, but that's part of your ulna right there. Okay, so the back side of the ulna, the posterior side, is kind of flat, but it has that pointed part that you can elbow someone with to give them a dead leg. But then this side, the anterior side, has a big notch in it. That's where the humerus sits. The humerus sits right inside that. Okay. Another interesting feature of the ulna and the radius are a couple things here. So this is called the head of the radius. There's a little radial notch right here that we'll talk about in a second. Okay, right here you can see it very clearly. Here's the radial notch, and you can see that radial head sits right in the radial notch of the ulna. Okay, and so that's another little joint that doesn't do anything for flexion and extension of your elbow, but what it helps you with is pronation and supination. Okay, and that's this right here. So right now I'm supinated, and you can think of that as I'm holding a bowl of soup when my palm's up, right? But then if I flip that over into pronation, I dump the soup out. Okay, so supinated, pronated. Okay, so the joint that allows for that movement is this little radio-ulnar joint there. Okay, another important point that just reminded me of to remind you of is that when we're talking about bones in the body, we're always assuming that we're in anatomical position, which is this right here. Okay, so this is anatomical position. So the ulna, which is on your pinky side, is always medial, and the radius, which is on the thumb side, is always lateral. Okay, when we're talking about an anatomical position. But look what happens when I pronate. It seems like the opposite, right? The radius ends up over here on the medial side, but unless you're actually, you don't go with that though. You always just say we're in anatomical position, so the radius is always lateral. Okay, so you always need to assume that we're starting in an anatomical position. Okay, and so this is what I was just talking about. When we're in anatomical position, you can see the ulna, the radius is over here laterally, ulna's over here. Okay, but then when we pronate, look what happens. That radius flips over completely to the other side. These bones cross over right here. Okay, and that all happened because of the spinning right here in this little joint. It's called the pivot joint. We'll get to that when we talk about joints. Okay, any other questions on that? Okay, so those are the kind of the forearm bones. Now let's talk about these hand bones. Okay, these hand bones are called the carpals. Okay, carpal bones. These ones are called the metacarpals. These guys, right? And these are the phalanges. Okay, most of the fingers, all the fingers except the thumb, have 3 phalanges, but then the thumb only has these 2. Okay, so has anybody ever learned a mnemonic for the carpal bones before? Raise your hand. Yeah, okay. So a mnemonic pretty much means that you take a word that has the same first letter as the thing that you're trying to memorize, and then you kind of put all those together, okay? So the way the mnemonics work typically is you start here, this is number one, okay? And then we work our way this way, right? And then you come back to over here, and you work your way back through this row, okay? So most of them are slightly inappropriate, but that helps you remember them. Okay, and so the one that I learned as a sophomore in college is the one that I'll tell you it's definitely inappropriate, but here it goes. So it goes: some lovers try positions that they can't handle. Okay, so that's some reason that stuck in my head for sure. If that one is too strange for you, then go to YouTube and just type in carpal bone mnemonics. You'll get all kinds of funny songs that people do, or you can make up your own. I always have students that make up their own too. So the one I did was: some lovers try positions that they, so there's those two T's in a row always, can't handle. Okay, and let me show you the names of the bones. Okay, so again, we're always starting with the scaphoid. That's number one. That's S. Okay, so it's the sum, going to the lunate next. That's the L, and we're going to the triquetrum. Okay, so scaphoid, lunate, triquetrum. Then we go to pisiform. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky how it kind of goes like this, and then it goes back up like that, right? Okay, so some lovers try positions, and now we need to go back to this side. We need to start back over here to the trapezium. That, they, trapezoid, and we got two more. The big one in the middle is the C. That's the capitate. Okay, can't, and then handle. Okay, is the hamate bone. Hamate bone is unique because it has this little hook on it called the hook of the hamate. Okay, I'm going to show you how to palpate two of those bones real quick, just so you can kind of get that feel for where they are. So put your hands up like this with me. Put your right hand up like that. Take your other thumb and take like the joint of your thumb right there, your interphalangeal joint in your thumb, and kind of put it right here where the crease of your wrist is. See, when you flex your wrist, there's like a nice straight crease. Put that joint right there on that crease, and you'll feel a little bone there. It's kind of a little round bone. You can actually kind of move it around like this. That's your pisiform. Your pisiform is a similar kind of bone as your patella. It's encased in a tendon. Okay, so put that joint right there, and then what you're gonna do is roll your thumb up. I'll show you how I do it. So you put it right there, and then you roll the thumb up into your palm and kind of push down in there a little bit. It's a little bit sensitive, right? It's kind of a hard spot, but it's hard there, and it's also a little bit sensitive. That's that hook of the hamate that I was showing you. Okay, that's that little hook sticking out, hook of the hamate. Okay. All right, so that's just a couple palpation points there. Okay, any questions on those? Okay, all right. So, and again, or not again, but just to make sure you see, this is an anterior view of the hand, okay? So most of the mnemonics are using that anterior view, and they're going this direction like we just showed. Okay. So just make sure if you see a hand with the posterior view, then you have to rethink that, right? You have to rethink the way that your mnemonic is going. Okay. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna send you guys into your breakout groups with your partners, and I'd like you just to go to that table where, back on, I'll show you which page it's on. Okay, so start on page, this is page 6. Okay, start on page 6, exercise 2, and just start working your way through all of these bones, all of these structures. Take some notes over here to remind yourself of what each one is, how to find it, okay? If it says left versus right, start studying that. So use your book to find these, use any other resources that you have available that have these bones, okay? Any questions about what we're gonna be doing? Okay, so I'm gonna give you about a half an hour to do this, okay? So about 30 minutes of doing this. I'm gonna pop into each of your rooms once just to say hi and to see if you have any questions, okay? So we good? Any questions? All right, I'm gonna send you. Okay, so yeah, so again, you can see the calcaneus, the cuboid, the lateral cuneiform, intermediate cuneiform, and medial cuneiform, and then the navicular, and then your T is right down there, the talus. Okay, so that's helpful to have that. All right, so there's those bones again. There's the lateral cuneiform, intermediate, and medial. Those 3 C's there. And we've got the cuboid, calcaneus, and then there's that kind of how they kind of connect. And then again, a little bit of the talus, and then that most medial bone, which is pretty large, is the navicular. Okay. All right, now this is a superior view of the foot. Now you can really see the talus. That's the talus, right? And that's that big smooth surface is what goes into that crurus part, that crural joint, right? That goes by that talocrural. So that's why it's nice and smooth. That's what allows your foot to do plantar flexion and dorsiflexion, that movement up and down. Okay. All right, guys. That's pretty much what I wanted to show you there. Again, yeah, just remember that you're studying those tables and exercise 2 and 3 with the appendicular bones, and that'll be on the quiz next week. Okay, next week the lab will not be synchronous; it'll be online on your own. But the lab quiz needs to be taken right during your lab time, starting at 5:30. Okay, and it'll actually shut off right at 5:15. So you need to take it right from 5 to 5:15. Okay. I'm sorry, not 5, but 15 minutes after, and you guys start at 5:30, not 5. Okay, so it's a 15-minute time limit, but it starts at 5:30. Okay, what questions do you have? Any questions you want to ask before we wrap up? Okay, all right, well, it's good to be with you guys tonight. Fun hanging out, nice getting to meet all of you and learn a little bit about you, and keep studying hard, and we'll see you guys tomorrow for class at 1:30. Okay. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank
Have a good-
you.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you.
you.
Dr. Sawyer?
Yeah.
So for the lab next Thursday, we would just take the quiz like at the start of it, and then after the quiz, we would do the online lab.
You can do that. The online lab will open up on Monday, actually. So you can do that online lab anytime during the week. It's just quiz needs to be at that time because we don't want somebody taking it and then, giving their answers to somebody else or something. So that's why everybody takes the quiz at the same time.
All right.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
All right. We'll see you later.
Bye-bye.